Hello, my name is Matthew, and um, typically when I want to make a video, uh, I feel most comfortable talking about what I'm reading. And what has worked really well for me is to make a video at the end of each book. And unconsciously, a lot of my recent videos have been either discussion videos or different kinds of videos instead of um, a specific conversation about a book that I just finished. And um, it's because for the past maybe 2 months, um, my first thought was that I was having a reading slump, having a hard time reading, and that's actually not true. I'm still reading every day, and for the most part, enjoying what I'm reading. Um, in large part, for the month of August, a lot of that was held up from reading the Odyssey with Steve Donahue. Just an incredible work. It was my primary book for the month of August. It was all the other reading kind of around that book, um, a little bit before we started it, and then now that we've finished, that I'm realizing that my reading has become um, unfocused. I'm not really sure what I'm interested in. And it turns out it's not that I'm in a reading slump, it's that I've just um, recently, 2 months ago, finished an amazing run of reading. And it was The Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, and then the three books of The Lord of the Rings, which I didn't even realize at the time as I was reading it. I knew I was enjoying it. I loved the trilogy. I didn't realize how invested and engrossed I'd become in the world of Middle Earth and following the hobbits and this kind of grand epic world building and story. When I had finished it, I thought, well, maybe I'll move on to some of the tales or the Silmarillion. I quickly lost interest. Maybe it could be that I had burnt out, and I thought I need to change direction. I read the science fiction story or fantasy, which added a lot. I'm unfamiliar with fantasy, and I really did get sucked in. A very easy way for me to recognize how invested I am in a book is all of the other distractions that we have, or other avenues for entertainment. Um, for the duration of reading The Lord of the Rings, almost any time I was doing something as a diversion, as far as watching videos or watching a TV program or reading another book, all I could think about for the most part was I just want to go back to the Lord of the Rings. I just want to spend time in that world, which is special. It happens periodically in my reading life. I'll have these long runs where whatever I'm interested in, whatever book or author or subject, I'll just go down a rabbit hole and I won't be thinking about what do I want to be reading, what do I want to be reading next. I'm just following one train of thought. And at the end of The Return of the King, I came out the other end at a loss, at a loss of what am I going to read now? thankfully I had my read along series with Steve, and so um, a little time went by, but we went into the Odyssey, which became pretty much my primary book of the month. But it only takes a day or two. If you read a day or two each night of the Odyssey, it still leaves 5 days each week with open ended, unstructured reading time. And for weeks now, I've been henpecking, just unfocused, scattered, trying to find something that I would be interested in. I talked about it a little bit, but I had picked up. It's a terrible title. In the Shadow of Young Girls and Flower. It's the. Is it Dramante? It should be Dramante's Way. Within a Budding Grove. Within a Budding Grove. And I started reading that. The main character, Marcel, as a young man, is getting all excited about going to the play and seeing Phaedra by Racine on stage. And so I'm reading Proust and enjoying it, having that same, or having that feeling of, is this what I'm going to be getting into? Am I going to start reading Proust again? And the thing is, I knew I wasn't going to be. And I was reading it and I thought, well, the main character is going off to see Phaedra by Racine. And I have a copy of Phaedra by Racine. And I started reading this, and it's wooden. The main character in Within a Budding Grove, he's going through these throes of ecstasy, talking about in anticipation of going to the play. He goes and he's ultimately disappointed because it's not as sublimely perfect as he had imagined. But I started reading Phaedra, and I was like, I was not, even for a short play, I thought like this. It's wooden. Maybe it's the translation, or maybe it's the story. And so Phaedra is a reimagining of at least the one story, a reimagining of Hippolytus by Euripides. And I thought, well, I'll go back and I'll read Hippolytus by Euripides. And maybe that's what I'll do. I'll just kind of drill down and then go back up to Proust. And I lost interest in that. All the while, I'm reading short stories. I read a handful of short stories or reportage pieces by Truman Capote. And I read Answered Prayers, and I made some sort of video talking about Answered Prayers. I've become much less inclined to talk about books that I don't like. So Answered Prayers was a disappointment. I also read Post Office by Charles Bukowski. I remember at the library around when I was 21, 22, maybe around that time period, going to the library, and there were certain authors where you would just, the shelves would have a block of one author, like a really substantial, distinctive block. And the ones that come to mind were Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Kurt Vonnegut and Bukowski. And for all those writers, I associate, at least the ones I just mentioned, I associate with my time at the library, getting out 2 or 3 books at a time, reading them all straight through very quickly and returning them. And some I like more than others. Hemingway and Fitzgerald, for the most part, I think really stand up, and I can go back to them. Kurt Vonnegut, a few years ago, I went back and read Sirens of Titan, I think. And I was never that big of a fan. I thought they were fun, forgettable books. but not astounding, nothing groundbreaking, and not hugely enjoyable. I found Kurt Vonnegut's books to all be very similar. When I think back, they all kind of blur together, and they have that recurring character, Kilgore Trout, which doesn't help separating the stories. And Bukowski was another one who was an author I never really liked. I've never gotten into his poetry, but I read a handful of his novels: Post Office, Women, Factotum, maybe other ones. And I reread Post Office, and I'm reluctant to even say it was a bad novel, because from any set of definitions that I could come up with, it just doesn't meet the standards of a novel. It's a series of chronological sketches, like a first person blog, or just like a journal entries of the day-to-day life of a rather selfish, self-involved, lazy, irresponsible, despicable main character, Harry Chinaski. And it's not just that it's a series of events, so that there's no plot. There's also no characters. The women are all creatures. The men are all obstacles. Any of Chinaski's bosses are just sort of these blowhard, looking down at the ground, stupid boss type characters. All of the people that Chinaski sees during his route, or just vague depictions of Chinaski believing that he's better than everybody else for some reason. He's just better than everything. So it's just a chronological series. There's no characters, and then there's no plot. The events that happen don't ever build up to anything. You might have a huge upturn. He loses his job. The book's called Post Office. He's a postman. And fairly early, he loses his job. But then he just gets his job back. He'll get married and get divorced. And none of the events build up to anything. They're just things that are happening. And I thought about making a video about it, but I thought, the only thing I could say is that the writing on a sentence by sentence level is clear. You can read it and it's understandable. They're just very clear, very simple sentences. I didn't find anything of substance or anything of value at all. What else do I have here? Similar to what I was saying, like reading something that I had read in the past and going back to it, I significantly disliked Bukowski more. I remember thinking like, well, I guess it was okay. Reading it again and going, this is awful. And I read some of Illuminations. I just read the first few prose poems by Rimbaud, and not that it's terrible. It is beautiful. This is the John Ashbery translation, but not nearly as thought-provoking or interesting as I had remembered. I'll read. So this is from Childhood. This idol, black eyes and yellow mane, without family or court, nobler than the fable, Mexican and Flemish, his domain, insolent azure and verdure, runs along beaches named by waves without ships, names that are ferociously Greek, Slavic, Celtic. Writes beautifully. It's very purple and ornate. Um, I just wasn't finding anything other than the beauty. I can go back to Baudelaire as a really good comparable example and find myself invested in other things other than the beautiful writing. I thought maybe I'd read a great big historical novel. One of my favorite French writers, Stendhal, The Charterhouse of Parma. I read like 2 pages. I finally turned to Tolstoy. I read the Death of Ivan Ilyich, which I think at least begins humorously. It has a very funny beginning. Ivan Ilyich, it's reported Ivan Ilyich has died, and we see his bureaucratic co-workers or colleagues all hearing this news, and everybody's thinking, well, who's going to get his position? Maybe if this person gets that position, I'll be able to get his position. And they just trivialize the fact that someone that they work with and know and sometimes are friends with just died. It's like, well, okay, how does this quite affect me? If we're going to the funeral, are we going to be able to play cards at the end of the night? And after that, I read a handful. I read After the Ball and The Forged Coupon. And Tolstoy is such a pleasure to read. It reminds me of that line in one of Horace's poems about these kind of stories are meant to be entertaining and also instructive. And I find that in the best of Tolstoy. At one point, I thought, well, I had just gotten this a while ago. It's the newest American edition of the Fugitive by Proust, and I was reading Within a Budding Grove and thought, well, what am I doing reading the second volume? I could go on to the 6th volume, and I still need to give this a read. And last night I was reading the beginning of Jacques the Fatalist. I just finished reading Rameau's Nephew by Diderot. Jacques the Fatalist and Diderot are both by Jacques the Fatalist, and Rameau's Nephew are both by Diderot. Who's just so enjoyable. They're both in a dialogue format. Rameau's Nephew is almost like a Socratic dialogue, except it's much more conversational. It feels much more realistic, even if the changes in subject are all big themes. The characters that are having a dialogue are often arguing with each other, insulting one another, making fun of each other. Really, really fun. But my point is, there's all of these things going on with no real focus. And for September, I'm not even relying on having my book club obligation. It's a graphic novel, Kingdom Come, which my reading obligation for that is 30 minutes in one day. So I still don't have a primary novel that I'm reading. So much of the stuff that I just mentioned is maybe spending a day, spending an afternoon reading, maybe just reading a few pages at night. A lot of the short stories I'm kind of reading through, but bouncing around like a pinball and not knowing what I want to read next. It's a very unfocused, scattered feeling. And as a result, most of the time when I'm pretty much all the time that I want to make a video, it's the same feeling I have when I want to tell Ben or tell a friend about what I'm reading. Not really knowing what I'm reading or not being really satisfied, I'm not inclined to want to talk about, if that makes any sense. So I have the day off today. It's still early. I'm going to spend some time and see if I can find a nice big fat book I can settle into. Let me know if any of this was interesting at all, or maybe any of the thoughts I had on any of the books that I mentioned. I'm not sure. So please leave a comment if you would like. And thank you for watching, and take care.